Hello, and thank you for joining me today for part two of Decoding Shakespeare's first folio. It's a numbers game. My name is Eric Luskow, and today is March 13th, 2024. If you have not watched part one, I would strongly suggest watching that first, as there is much preliminary information needed for this presentation to make sense. Before we start, I'd like to improve upon one of my points from part one related to the principal actors page. My original slide, I think, did not clearly show how Susan Herbert's initials are also connected to the Vere and Cecil names. Here's a better view. Susan shares the H for Herbert with William, then she uses the W for William as a double V for Vere, Vero nihil verius, and then has the C for Cecil. I hope this slide makes the point a bit clearer. Now, here's the geometric values slide again for reference if needed. Sadly, I now have these values memorized. So we left off at the end of part one after having reviewed the histories on the catalog page. Now we'll turn to the tragedies where Hinman identifies the two major pagination anomalies, but I would contend fails to completely account for them. The first anomaly is Troilus and Cressida. That Troilus and Cressida was supposed to follow Romeo and Juliet is indisputable. A canceled page with the last page of Romeo and Juliet backed with the first page of Troilus and Cressida slipped into a folio now in possession of the Folger and is reproduced in the Norton facsimile appendix. The editors clearly changed plans and instead placed Timon of Athens after Romeo and Juliet. Hinman states that there is no doubt the issue was with copyright of Troilus and Cressida. I believe there is doubt. The quarto for Troilus and Cressida was published in 1609, which was the same year the sonnets were published and immediately pulled back. The Oxfordian theory for the 1609 sonnets publication revolves around Elizabeth Trentham and the sale of King's Place. I don't have that citation at hand, but I will find it before putting this into a paper. I would argue that it's possible for Troilus and Cressida quarto, with the second version containing the notorious "a never writer to an ever reader," was not sanctioned by the grand possessors. The play is extraordinarily dark, really a black comedy rather than a tragedy. And the character, I believe, at the crux of the Troilus and Cressida puzzle is Pandarus. It's well documented that the Hamlet character, Corambus, was renamed Polonius to avoid the obvious association that Corambus made to William Cecil, Lord Burleigh. Cecil's motto contained cor unum, one heart, while Corambus is two hearts, i.e., double-dealing, two-faced. In Troilus and Cressida, Pandarus is another character modeled on William Cecil. I'll go into additional detail in a future episode of this series while looking more closely at Troilus and Cressida. But for now, in short, I believe the decision on whether to include Troilus and Cressida or not could have just been an internal editorial dispute as much as a copyright complication. The second major pagination anomaly in the tragedies is the jump in Hamlet from page 156 to 257. Hinman writes it off as another compositor error, but I disagree. We'll look at it more closely in the spreadsheet slide, but for now, convert the 2 to Z, then to geometric value 24, then add the 5 and the 7 to get to our near ubiquitous 36. Do we have just another conveniently placed compositor error, or do we have determined editors scattering breadcrumbs for the knowledgeable reader? You get to decide. Now, more gematria and spreadsheets. In this slide on the left-hand side, we see Julius Caesar beginning on page 109, as mentioned in part 1. We see Hamlet beginning on page 152, 15 plus 2 equals 17. We see a combination of contiguous numbers in Lear, Othello, and Antony and Cleopatra, totaling 17 twice, leaving only the O unused. Looking at the totals for each column in orange, we see the left and center columns totaling 57, then adding the right column, our sum is 92. Assuming you watched part 1, I don't need to explain these numbers. but remember, it's all possible due to the 100-page jump in Hamlet. On the right-hand side of the slide, we see two examples of 1 plus 3 plus 5 plus 8 equals 17, conveniently surrounding the 109 of Julius Caesar. On this slide, I've converted each column into geometric values. You'll see that the right column in blue totals 109. If you're keeping score, this is the third instance of 109. You'll also see on this slide that the left and center geometric columns in orange total 125. 12 plus 5 equals 17. In the left geometric column in yellow, we've got 51 again, 17 times 3, and we've got 3 threes in pink for 33. In the center geometric column, we see 9 plus 8 equals 17 in yellow. Then in the center and right columns combined, we have 69 twice. On this slide, I've split the right geometric column further into two columns. The rightmost column in light blue totals 69. So to briefly summarize here, I'm not a mathematician, but I feel secure in saying that the odds of all these permutations of 17, 40, 51, 57, 92, 109, 36, 69, 369 being random are astronomical. Now, let's have a look at page 3, unnumbered, of the folio, which contains the first title and the infamous engraving. The principal actors page is essentially a second title page, and we'll look at that page in a moment. I'm solely focused on the title, so I've cropped the engraving out. To begin, look at the way the words comedies, histories, and tragedies line up. The compositor, at the behest of our editors, I argue, has aligned the letters E, O, and G, Edward, Oxenford, God. Notice the spacing on either side of the A in tragedies and how obvious the intent is to align E, O, and G. Now let's look at the first line, Mr. William Shakespeare's. Note that it's different than the principal actors title page, which has the works of William Shakespeare. So here's the principal actors title for comparison. Now, back to the engraving title page. So here are the geometric values for Mr. William Shakespeare's. The first three letters in yellow total 69. You can also see the 17 plus 40 equals 57. The next four numbers in orange total 40. Then the next five numbers in pink total 40. Next, we've got three numbers in purple totaling 33. Three numbers adding up to 33. Then we have six numbers totaling 61, where we can add 6 plus 1 to get 7, which in gematria is letter G, signifying God. Or we can convert the 1 to I to geometric 9 to get 69, which then, by subtracting 6 from 9, gets us to 369. You can also get Ben Johnson's signature by taking the geometric value of M from Mr., which is 12, then changing the 1 to I to geometric value 9 equals I, 2 equals B for Ben. As I said in part 1, this is how gematria works. Now in this slide, I've separated the geometric value into two columns. The total geometric value in yellow is 243, which added together 2 plus 4 plus 3 equals 9. And that can be further manipulated to get to 369 again. The far right column in blue totals 93, and by subtracting 3 from 9 again, we can get to 369. The left geometric column in pink is more convoluted, but can once again get us to 369 by turning the i's to 1s, then to the geometric value of 9, then separating the first 9 into a 3 and a 6. Again, we have to think like 16th and 17th century Europeans. To them, gematria and the sacred power of numbers and letters were inseparable from both religion and science, which were themselves inseparable. Now, let's look more closely at the phrase published according to the true original copies. And yes, here's another spreadsheet. So we have Ben Jonson's signature again twice in orange. We already saw it in the word original in the principal actors page, but here we can also see it in original and published. We also have 71 reversed to 17 for De Vere in yellow, then several variations on 369 and Gematria 7, G for God, which we just saw in the EOG alignment and in the Mr. William Shakespeare's Gematria slide previously. So if you've seen questions, as I have, about how text can be true, original, and a copy, I believe we can blame it on our editor's numbers games. There also may be a Christian reference here with God, original, the originator of all, the Holy Spirit, true, truth, and Christ, copy, a copy of God like a child is a copy of the parent. On this slide, I've taken the gematria values of just the first initial of each word. In orange, we can get to 369 and our G for God, plus Pat as the Latin root reference to Father. 3 T's in pink give us 57, plus a triple tau. And lastly, in yellow, yet another 17. Now, finally, after a lengthy sojourn through the preliminary pages, we can begin to look at how our editors use gematria and pagination in the folio text of the plays to aid us in finding the author. So here is page 17 of The Tempest. We'll zoom in a bit to view what I believe is the passage the editors want to draw attention to. We have Ferdinand and Miranda playing at chess. We have the double meaning of play plus the image of chess as a game in which an old artificer, to borrow a phrase from James Joyce, moves pieces around a board, which is another double meaning, i.e. stage boards. Additionally, we have Miranda's line, and I would call it fair play, with the pun of fair and ver. And yes, I would call The Tempest a ver play. So here's the Tempest gematria spreadsheet. I've color-coded 8 examples of gematria linking the title, The Tempest, to De Vere's gematric numbers. You might even call this slide a tight nexus of numbers, conveying a very clear message. And remember, we're no longer looking at folio paratext. This is the title of the first play in the folio. Now, on to Two Gentlemen of Verona, page 36. As the type of knowledgeable reader Ben Jonson approves of, we should be attuned to the number 36. What I believe the editors are bringing to our attention is Act 5, Scene 2, where Thurio questions Proteus regarding his, Thurio's, suite for Julia's affections. I won't read the passage, but the picture we get is of a man short in stature with a fair face, who talks too much of war, love, and peace, who is by turns valorous or a coward, is of high birth but can be called a fool, and has many possessions but is an ass for having mortgaged them. For Oxfordians, this sounds like our author. By the way, Thurio has the familiar EO for Edward Oxenford, but beyond that, Thur, i.e. Thor/Thursday, is in Latin the fifth day or Fiaria Quinta, another play on words, this time multilingual with fair and ver. Next up is page 40, which is Act 1, Scene 1 of The Merry Wives of Windsor. If we've interpreted our gematria, De Vere's signature, and the name William Shakespeare correctly, we will know that the number 40 is significant. There are numerous clues on this page that I believe require our attention. Foremost is the identity of Slender as Sir Philip Sidney. There is an excellent article by Charles Vere on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship site, which I will refer you to. Search for Slender, Sir Philip Sidney, and it should be the top link. The scene here contains the mediation of a dispute between Pistol and Slender, which quickly disintegrates into mutual duel challenges. So here is the glove-slapping duel challenge passage. It also identifies that Slender is there to court, though not particularly romantically, mistress and page. Those with knowledge of court intrigue would be able to pick up on these clues and recall the game of tennis incident where Sidney challenged De Vere to a duel, and also that De Vere and Sidney were rivals in the courtship of Anne Cecil. Later in Act 5, Scene 5, Caius, with his French accent, says, "There is Mistress Page?" Yes, Mistress Page is a Vere. Another curious bit in this scene is Slender's reference to my songs and sonnets and the Book of Riddles. So Riverside glosses these allusions as Toddle's Miscellany, 1557, and the Book of Riddles, circa 1575, but I would contend that they may instead be references to Sidney's own poetry and his defense of poesy, both circulating in manuscript well before their actual printed publication. Sidney's sonnets strongly emulated Henry Howard's sonnets, who was De Vere's uncle, which are in Toddle's Miscellany, and in the defense of poetry, Sidney objected to the violation of Aristotle's unities in the current Elizabethan plays, including Shakespeare's. Now, in this scene, Slender's servant Simple suggests that Slender gave his riddle book to a prostitute, Alice Shortcake, in an unlikely time frame. The play makes a mockery of Aristotle's unity of time with repeated references to the times between 8 and 9 and between 10 and 11. 8 plus 9 equals 17, and the precise time between 10 and 11 is 10:30. 10 plus 30 equals 40. Oh, and one more thing, as a famous fictional U.S. detective used to say, when inquiring after his books, Slender says, "I had rather than 40 shillings, I had my books." Exactly 40 lines earlier, Slender has a line referring to 2 Edward shovelboards. Riverside glosses these as shillings worn smooth from the era of Edward VI, used to play shovelboard, i.e. shuffleboard. The shuffleboard part is accurate, but the part about Edward VI appears to have come from Edmund Malone, and I strongly question his source, if there was one. So here in the bad quarto of Merry Wives, the line reads, "2 fair shovelboard shillings." Stratfordians generally dismiss any references to the relentless punning on fair and bear, but this isn't even a pun. It's a replacement of fair with Edward. Granting that the quarto of Merry Wives of Windsor was a shortened performance version, a memorial reconstruction, or perhaps both, it's difficult to see, if you're not an Oxfordian, how the quarto fair changed to the Folio Edward. Parenthetically, this anomaly illustrates why it's important to read the primary texts. Now, we have the first real pagination anomaly of the folio. Page 50 is misnumbered as page 58. 9 pages later, page 59 is misnumbered as page 51. Hinman provides a plausible explanation that can be summarized as the compositors forgot to change the page numbers. To be fair, it is a plausible explanation. The form set immediately preceding was page 51, page 58. See Hinman for details explaining quires in 6, forms, and general 16th, 17th century printing practices. But we're still looking at the first uncorrected pagination errors in the folio, and there are some peculiarities. First, we're in quire E for Edward, and next, every page combination in this quire totals 109, a number we have seen before. And lastly, I'll show some examples of where our editors play with printing signatures in a later presentation. But right now, in short, I would argue that this is not a compositor error, but rather an editorial decision meant to bring attention to these 2 pages plus the other pair of pages 58 and 51, where page 59 is misnumbered as page 51. So here's page 58, which is really page 50. So what did our editors want us to see here? So Facing page 51, which is one of our key numbers, is page 58. Here I think they're telling us, in case we have not yet caught on, to pay attention. By using the text of the play out of context, the editors, I believe, are speaking to us directly. In the passage I've highlighted, gentlemen, I have dreamed tonight. I'll tell you my dream. Here, here, here be my keys. Ascend my chambers. Search, seek, find out. I'll warrant we'll unkennel the fox. These lines are delivered by Ford. So we've got a Ford and we've got an ox inside a fox. And we also have Falstaff hidden in a laundry basket. But more importantly, I think we have our editors saying, look inside our heads, ascend my chambers. Use these keys we're giving you to search, seek, and find out who the author really is. So here's page 51 that's facing that wrong page, 58. And I've highlighted dialogue between Fenton and Anne. Fenton's our stand-in for De Vere. Fenton describes himself as too great of birth, and my state galled with my expense, followed by him characterizing his behavior as my riots past and my wild societies. I would argue that our editors are again pointing us to the author, Edward de Vere, in the author's own words. These characteristics that Fenton just described don't match the man from Stratford, Bacon, Marlowe, Neville, Florio, Elizabeth I, Mary Sidney, the Earl of Derby, or any other purported authorship candidate. So here's our second page, 58 and 51. And like I said before, this time it's page 59 that is misnumbered as page 51. Note how the key letter I can be converted to Gematria 9, Johnson's last initial, and that indeed gives us the correct page number of 59. I've highlighted what I believe is the key passage on this misnumbered page, in which Falstaff calls himself an ass and Ford calls him an ox. If you recall, the passage in Two Gentlemen of Verona referred to Thurio as an ass, and now Falstaff calls himself an ass. This won't be the last time a passage, I believe, the editors are pointing us to reference an ass. An ass and an ox are beasts of burden, and also, though, of course, I have no proof, I suspect that De Vere, in his later years, may have referred to himself multiple times as an ass. Possibly his family and his friends did as well. The reference to an ox requires no additional commentary for Oxfordians. And by the way, Ford's line, well said, Fairy Hugh, has 17 letters and can be rearranged to say, you, there, well said. I'm going to skip over pages 57 and 69, two of our key numbers, but they're not pagination anomalies, and I'll address those at the beginning of part 3 of this series. Instead, I want to look at the next real pagination error in the folio, and I can call it an error this time because it's from the Comedy of Errors. It's page 86, which is misnumbered as page 88. Hinman mentions this anomaly, but again ascribes it to compositor error, which is plausible in isolation, but seen in the larger pattern I'm attempting to demonstrate in these presentations, I question it. So the passage highlighted here has Antipholus of Syracuse twice saying he intends to lose himself. But far more important is the phrase, commend you to your own content, spoken by the first merchant, then reiterated by Antipholus of Syracuse as, commend me to my own content. Commend me to my own content. Sounds vaguely familiar. Where have we seen those lines or something similar before? Oxfordians know. Here it is. This slide and the next are from Thomas Looney's The Poems of Edward de Vere, 3rd edition, edited by Ruth Lloyd Miller. And though commend and not command is used in the poem, command is used and not commend in the poem, the similarity is undeniable. Miller helps the modern reader along by also noting the resemblance in language between de Vere's poem and lines from Richard II, Act 3, Scene 3, and Henry VI, Part 2, Act 4, Scene 9. And here is Sir Philip Sidney's response poem. The editors again use mispagination to bring to our attention the documented relationship between De Vere and Sidney that was first brought forward in The Merry Wives of Windsor. Though critical to the Oxfordian position, Were I a King is signed by De Vere. This concludes Part 2. Please join me for Part 3 of Decoding Shakespeare's First Folio. It's a numbers game, where we will continue to look upon his book to find our author's identity. Thank you for watching.